Today is the 22nd of the second month of 2022. What more? It falls on the second day of the week, which is a Tuesday. Special day across the world, and it's called Tuesday. We will not experience another day like this for another 200 years. Very good evening. Welcome to Primetime News on TV1. Before we head on to your stories in detail, here are your headlines for tonight.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
People in line for fuel. Special cabinet meeting to solve energy crisis. April 21st attack report submitted to Parliament. Several clauses in the Special Goods and Services tax bill inconsistent with the Constitution. A determination from the Supreme Court. Who is destroying maize cultivations in Riddhi Maliadda? 22nd of February 2022. Putin recognizes independence of Ukraine breakaway regions.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
The fate of world peace hangs in the balance as the focus of the entire world is now on the border between Russia and Ukraine. A story that has made global headlines, and of course the outcome of this conflict will affect all of us in the world and here in Sri Lanka as well. Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday recognized the independence of two separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, an unprecedented move. This has caused a massive uproar in the international crises of a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. News First, Senator Sena Naika brings us more details.
Self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, they are situated in the east of Ukraine, and these are the two areas that Russia has recognized as independent from the entire country of Ukraine. Now, to understand the situation that is happening today, we have to look back at history. In 2014, as you know, Russia annexed Crimea, which is this part of Ukraine, and when they annexed Crimea, an armed uprising began in these two regions. These rebels who started the armed uprising were supported by Russia. They were armed, they were provided weapons by Russia, and their independence is not recognized by the international community. And Ukraine and the West say that Russia has instigated an uprising in the east by pouring in weapons and through the border and bolstering these regions. Now, with that being said, this is what the Russian president had to say about the move Russia made yesterday. Russia's recognition of separatist regions in eastern Ukraine is a direct challenge to the West backed by the United States. It fuels fears that Russia could imminently invade Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are locked in a nearly 8-year conflict with Russia-backed separatists that has left more than 14,000 people dead.
I consider it necessary to take a long overdue decision to immediately recognize the independence and sovereignty of Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. I am asking the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation to support this decision and then ratify treaties of friendship and mutual assistance with both republics.
The announcement by Russia has drawn anger from Western nations. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said fresh sanctions would be imposed on Russian banks and some businessmen while freezing their assets and banning them from UK.
Today, the UK is sanctioning the following 5 Russian banks: Rossiya, IS Bank, General Bank, Promzyaz Bank, and the Black Sea Bank. And we are sanctioning 3 very high net worth individuals: Gennady Timchenko, Boris Rottenberg, and Igor Rottenberg. Any assets they hold in the UK will be frozen. The individuals concerned will be banned from travelling here. and we will prohibit all UK individuals and entities from having any dealings with them.
In 2015, Germany and France brokered a peace agreement. This agreement was signed by representatives from Russia, Ukraine, and leaders of these territories. This was an important milestone in reaching a solution when it comes to the Ukraine crisis, because this agreement prompted a pullback of heavy weapons from the region and encouraged a political solution. But now that Russia has recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as independent regions and have agreed to supply weapons to them as well, it is a clear violation of the 2015 agreement. And this has drawn critical responses from the United Nations, the United States, and even Ukraine at the yesterday's Security Council meeting.
The UN political chief opened an emergency meeting of the Security Council calling Russia's recognition of separatist areas in Ukraine's east a violation of the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty.
The Secretary General considers the decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the independence of certain areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions to be a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. We very much regret this decision, which risks having regional and global repercussions.
The US ambassador to the United Nations said Russia's announcement is an unprovoked attack on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Russia's clear attack on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is unprovoked. It is an attack on Ukraine's status as a UN member state. It violates a basic principle of international law, and it defies our charter. What is more, this move by President Putin is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for a further invasion of Ukraine.
The Russian announcement also drew criticism from Ukraine.
We are on our land. We are not afraid of anything or anyone. We owe nothing to anyone, and we will not give away anything to anyone.
Now, meanwhile, Sri Lanka has issued an advisory to all Sri Lankans living in Ukraine. Let's take a look at that statement.
The Foreign Ministry is requesting all Sri Lankans to avoid unessential travel to Ukraine. In a statement, it said the Sri Lankan embassy is in touch with more than 40 Sri Lankans, including 14 students there. The ministry has requested all Sri Lankans in Ukraine to remain vigilant and to be in touch with the embassy based in Turkey.
As Sri Lankans, what can we observe from the ongoing Ukraine crisis? Now, we know that there are special economic zones here in Sri Lanka in which different laws are being enacted. We are importing fuel from India given the shortage of fuel in the country. At a time like this, if India and China enter into a conflict, how will Sri Lanka be impacted? How will we handle such a geopolitical situation? On the other hand, what if another country recognizes Trincomalee as a state that is separate from Sri Lanka? Will we not be in a position of being forced into a corner on our homeland? Sri Lanka is a tiny island compared to Ukraine. Ukraine is being held up against a wall given the today's situation. Now, what would happen to us in a similar situation? Because we see what's happening across the world, and it's time for the authorities here at home to take note of these situations.
Usually we check up on the weather updates at the start of the day, maybe to decide if or not we need to carry an umbrella when we go outside to plan our day. There is a new update that people are now forced to check up on, and that is how long will we have to suffer power cuts? We'll bring you the details after this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
Register today for a Zoom workshop on new technology in Sinhala.
On the 24th of February at 3 p.m. Engineering techniques to build the world.
Register via 0777 600
Organized by Slit Institute.
Tech Bus.
Main sponsor.
Slit Knowledge University. Challenging convention and redefining education.
Welcome back to the news. 200 buses which were taken out of service were repaired and re-added to the fleet of buses for passenger transport under the patronage of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
The importation of buses was also suspended along with the restriction on the importation of vehicles. Accordingly, steps were taken to repair the dilapidated buses as a solution to the shortage of buses and in order to save foreign exchange. 200 buses that were completely out of service at 107 depots across the country were repaired at a cost of 136 million rupees. The project is being carried out by the Sri Lanka Transport Board and Lakdiva Engineering Company with the full support of the Sri Lanka Public Transport Employees Union. The President inspected the standard of the buses and engaged in conversation with the SLTB employees. State Minister Diluma Munugama and Transport Minister Pavitra Vanyarachi inspected these buses before the President conducted an inspection at Galle Face, where these buses were parked after arriving from many areas in the island.
These buses were given a new life by the mechanics of the Sri Lanka Transport Board. These buses were repaired inside the bus depot and have been brought to a better standard. We will be rewarding the exceptional work carried out. We did a similar program last year as well. The SLTB does not face an issue regarding fuel because we pay for the fuel that we purchase. If there is fuel available, we will pay for it, and we are not in debt like the others. These buses will only operate with the passengers, and we have made adjustments to the timetable. If a bus was to travel from Jaffna today, it will not go to Jaffna. Instead, one of these buses will go to Jaffna.
People across many parts of Sri Lanka were seen waiting in line to obtain fuel from filling stations.
There are many things that can be stopped if one is to limit the use of fuel. The burden should not fall on the people. There are many state-owned vehicles in use. Over 100 vehicles follow one car. They are burdening the people rather than putting a stop to their own wastage.
The Ministry of Energy has warned the public not to stockpile fuel unnecessarily out of fear. The Secretary to the Ministry, KDR Volga, stated that 2 ships carrying petrol and diesel have arrived in Colombo and the payment of $35 million is underway to the ship carrying diesel with the intervention of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Accordingly, the Secretary to the Ministry stated that steps have also been taken to expedite the distribution of fuel throughout the island from tomorrow.
The Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka has granted permission to impose power cuts of 4.5 hours tomorrow. The Commission said it had granted permission to a request made by the Ceylon Electricity Board. Accordingly, groups A, B and C will experience power cuts of 4 hours and 40 minutes, while other groups will experience power cuts of 4 hours and 30 minutes. You can visit our website www.newsfirst.lk for more news on this story. Now, the CEB has announced that power cuts will be imposed across the country as well, and how these power cuts will be imposed. Let's take a look at that story.
The Ceylon Electricity Board said power cuts will take place today as well. According to the CEB, this situation has arisen as power plants that need to generate 541 megawatts of electricity have run out of fuel. Accordingly, power cuts are in effect from 4:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. across the island for 11 individual groups. A 2-hour power cut is in effect between 4:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. for groups A, B and C, while all other groups will experience 3-hour power cuts. To know what time your local area will experience a power cut, visit www.newsfirst.lk. Many areas were affected by unscheduled power cuts on Monday. People from Polonnaruwa and Mineria alleged that they had lost power for 2 hours from 7 p.m. and again lost electricity for 2 hours from 9 a.m.
This government is operating like a prepaid service. They're very keen on printing rupees. However, when they run out of printing paper, they lose everything. The actual rate of the dollar is north of 250. The government is facing a financial situation. They committed fraud to the tune of 2 billion rupees from the garlic scam. 15.9 billion was skimmed from sugar. These need to be recovered. Why can't the Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts recover the money? It is the government that needs to fund energy management and produce fuel. We accept that there is a crisis situation. We are making all attempts to manage the situation at this time. On Monday, the President instructed to allow for letters of credit to be opened as a special directive and to support the two respective institutions to secure a positive financial position. The global oil prices are also increasing given the present situation, especially when it comes to the tensions between Ukraine and Russia that prompted prices to spike in the world. You are well aware that both the state entities are suffering losses and providing fuel. There may be changes in the future. A special cabinet meeting was convened on Tuesday evening as per a decision reached on Monday to discuss the present energy crisis. We have a total capacity of 3,551 megawatts. The Ceylon Electricity Board can supply electricity at any time. In addition to this, we also have renewable energy which produces another 1,357 megawatts of power. This means we have a total of 4,908 megawatts of power. The highest demand for power in the country is from 6:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., which is 2,700 megawatts of power. Therefore, it is clear that we have enough power in the country. What is happening in Sri Lanka today? We ran out of diesel in 2 days. We can't obtain 37,500 metric tons of diesel without $36 million. Now this is the crisis. If we do not utilize these power plants, there will inevitably be a 2.5-hour power cut from today onwards. If the required 23 metric tons of coal are not imported before April, this crisis will further intensify.
You can access the power cut schedule that was published by the CEB on our award-winning website www.newsfirst.lk. Moving on in more local news, the Supreme Court has informed Parliament that the Special Goods and Services Tax Bill should be passed with a 2/3 majority and a referendum.
The Special Goods and Services tax is to be imposed on liquor, cigarettes, vehicles, telecommunications and betting and gaming. The bill, which proposes the tax to be collected under a unit set up under the purview of a Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, was challenged in the Supreme Court. In its determination, the Supreme Court has said that some clauses are inconsistent with the Constitution and that the bill should be passed with a 2/3 majority and a referendum.
Meanwhile, the draft bill that proposes a tax of 25% on the EPF, ETF, companies, partnerships and individuals who have earned a profit of more than 2 billion rupees for the 2020-2021 financial year was tabled in Parliament today. It was titled Surcharge Tax Bill. Although the Finance Minister had assured that the employees' funds will be exempt from this tax, this amendment had not been included in the draft that was tabled.
125 ටැක්ස් කරනවා කියන එක ආණ්ඩුව කිව්වා මේක අපි ඉවත් කරගන්නවා කියලා. නමුත් මේ පඩත එහෙම ඉවත් කරලා නැහැ. දල්ලමැතිතුමා ප්‍රකාශයක් කරා ඒක අන්තර්ගත වන්නේ නැහැ කියලා.
ඒක එතුමා තැන් තැන් වල කියලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. එතුමාට බෑ නීතිය වෙනස්.
It's pointless if he just makes statements here and there. He cannot change the law. It is only the Parliament that can change the law. A week after he made the statement, you have tabled the surcharge tax bill that includes the EPF and the ETF. Governor Cabral says there is no issue and that these problems will be resolved solved in a few weeks, but the reality is quite different. We had foreign reserves of $7.8 billion, but by the end of January that dropped to $2.3 billion. $1.6 billion of that is Chinese yuan. We only have $700 million in hand. Since August last year, our foreign remittances reduced by 30, 40 and 50% subsequently. Finally, in December, it reduced by 60%. Cabral had told Bloomberg that he expects to sell the assets of the country through sell and deliver and generate $1 billion during the past 6 months. But we have not received that money yet. Minister Gamman Pilla said that many members of the cabinet are now ready to go to the IMF. In November 2020, we made a speech of 1 hour and said that these issues can be solved if we go to the IMF. But we don't believe that we can solve this issue by getting the help only from the IMF. It is only if the debt is sustainable that the IMF will help us without restructuring our debt. If the debt is not sustainable, we cannot come out of this mess by just going to the IMF. The loans will have to be restructured.
Will the government obtain the support of the IMF? Journalists raised questions regarding this at today's cabinet media briefing. The government is looking at this with an open mind. During the last 50 years, Sri Lanka has gone to the IMF 29 times. The most amount of loans had been obtained from them under the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration in 2009. The government remains open to hold discussions with them. We hope that the situation will become more favorable in the future. It's true that we are facing a crisis. We hope to obtain the support and advice of the International Monetary Fund and to work with other organizations as well. We are already holding discussions with the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. The government looks at it with an open mind. We will obtain their support if necessary.
Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa expressed these views on the intimidation of journalists and civil activists in the country.
By using law enforcement units such as the Criminal Investigations Department, they are trying to intimidate journalists and civil activists by amending the constitution and imposing restrictions on the freedom of speech. We have seen that the government is increasingly using formal and informal forces to suppress the freedom of speech. The suspects involved in the attack on Chamudita Samaravikrama's residence are yet to be identified. A court order has been issued to provide him security, but the court order is also yet to be implemented.
They had attacked his house using stones and fecal matter. However, he had not faced any bodily harm. We have stationed police officers at the entrance to the housing complex and provided the required security. There's a logbook for police officers at the gate of journalist Chamudita's house. Even on the day of the attack, the officers had signed it at around 12:45 that night. I feel that you are making these comments targeting the UN Human Rights Council sessions. I express my regret over that.
You said that this incident had occurred after the logbook was signed at around 12:45 that night. Therefore, the group that carried out the attack may have carefully observed the time in which the book is signed. Through its actions, the government must prove that there is freedom of speech. It's wrong to say that we are making these comments targeting the UN HRC sessions. That's a very cheap statement. Whenever we discuss this with the international community, we never betray our country. Remember that. We are not traitors who betray our country to Geneva. Now you can see the state of the so-called patriotic government. There are no dollars or fuel to protect the country. The government can't even provide electricity properly during the A-level exams. Therefore, don't use Geneva as an excuse to save yourselves from everything.
මේ A level විභාගේ තියෙන සමේ විදුලිය සපයා ගන්නත් බැරි ආණ්ඩුව. හරි හරි. වැඩ බැරි ආණ්ඩුව. අදක්ෂ ආණ්ඩුව. හැම දෙයකින්ම බේරෙන්න ජිනීවා කියන මන්ත්‍රය කියන්න යන්න එපා.
Will Sri Lanka's booster vaccines go to waste?
Nothing happens without cause and reason. Even though many of the crises we are faced with today affect our day-to-day lives, it is important to remember that they did not appear out of thin air. The fuel crises, the power crises, the dollar crisis, the agriculture and food crises, the LP gas issue, and a litany of other difficult situations Sri Lanka finds itself in today all have root causes. The 2015 Hollywood movie, Our Brand is Crises, revolves around a plot to gain political power by manufacturing crises. Be it political power or economic benefits, a crisis presents the perfect opportunity for those in the circle of power. Now, this is why the present socio-economic crisis in Sri Lanka is faced with must be assessed intelligently and mindfully and addressed with wisdom and experience as opposed to stopgap action.
Several issues are plaguing Sri Lanka, raising questions on how they originated in the first place. It goes without saying that there is no smoke without a fire. In light of such a scenario, let's take a microscopic look at certain issues that have left the country in limbo. The shortage of dollars in Sri Lanka's financial system has crippled imports for several months. What caused this crisis? If COVID-19 is attributed as a reason for the crisis, how did Sri Lanka's export revenue and amount of remittances rise at the onset of the pandemic? In what seems to be an irony, Sri Lanka's export earnings and remittances of workers dropped as COVID-19 cases continued to recede. Authorities took measures to prevent the exchange rate from floating and to also use up its foreign currency reserves to fix the exchange rate of the rupee to the dollar. However, now, authorities say that there are neither reserves nor dollars in Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan workers overseas are now being provided with a 10 rupee incentive in addition to the exchange rate when remitting money to the country. Amidst a shortage of reserves and dollars, Sri Lanka went ahead and repaid an international sovereign bond of $500 million in January. At that time, experts on the subject reiterated that it would be apt for Sri Lanka to delay the repayment of its $500 million ISB. If that was the case, why did Sri Lanka go ahead and repay the sovereign bond? Economic experts had said that there was no reason to repay the ISB on time if no one is going to benefit through that. The shortage of dollars has a ripple effect on Sri Lanka's economy and other sectors as well. Most importantly, the agriculture sector. On the 27th of April last year, authorities published a gazette banning the import of chemical fertilizer and agrochemicals. The move affected farmers in many areas, resulting in the loss of harvest as well. What steps did the government take amidst such a crisis? The government awarded a tender to China's Qingdao Seawind Biotech Group to import 90,000 metric tons of organic fertilizer. However, local experts detected that the fertilizer contains a harmful bacteria. What was the end result of this? The ship carrying organic fertilizer, which was even sailing in Sri Lankan waters under a different name, had to return amidst mounting pressure by local experts. However, Sri Lanka had to eventually pay $6.9 million to the Chinese company without receiving any fertilizer. The intermediaries involved in this transaction are known to some. In addition to that, Sri Lanka had decided to import nano-nitrogen fertilizer from India at a rate that was 2 or 3 times higher than the market value. It was revealed in Parliament that 290 million rupees had even been deposited to a personal bank account for the payments to be made for the fertilizer deal. This was how a few lined their pockets as the agriculture sector in the country went into limbo. The gas crisis was the talking point of the country for several months. The state-run gas company introduced a new 18-litre cylinder to the market after reducing its weight compared to the regular cylinder. The new product was released as the two gas companies continued to demand for a price increase. What followed the shortage of gas cylinders in the market? Although permission was granted to increase the price of gas cylinders, gas explosions continued to rock the country for several days. The chairman of the state-run gas company himself admitted that there was a mafia involved in securing long-term contracts to supply gas to Sri Lanka. A special committee appointed by the president found that the gas explosions were caused due to the change in composition. A shortage of gas cylinders arose in the market again, leaving people in queues to purchase them. It is being reported that moves are afoot to purchase gas on an emergency basis instead of providing a long-term tender. Attempts were also made to merge the two gas companies in Sri Lanka to import gas to the country. The latest issue crippling the country are fuel shortages and power cuts. Sri Lanka has awarded a long-term contract to the PetroChina gas company to supply refined oil. The long-term contract is usually awarded to a company by calculating the demand in the country. When a long-term contract is awarded, payments are not usually made for the first fuel tankers immediately and are instead paid after at least 180 days. How did Sri Lanka lose its fuel stocks? Sri Lanka imports refined oil as well as crude oil that would be refined at the Sapugaskanda refinery. The long-term tender for crude oil imports had been given to the Consio Nigerian company. However, Sri Lanka had not received crude oil from that company. Eventually, the government closed down the Sapugaskanda refinery temporarily, citing it as a step to save dollars. As the amount of refined oil produced by the Sapugaskanda refinery continued to decline, the government decided to import refined oil to fill the storage. This bears testament to the fact that a long-term tender alone is insufficient to import refined oil to the country. While the country was already facing a shortage of dollars and fuel, the minister's remarks of a possible fuel shortage aggravated the problem. Payments for oil consignments that reach Sri Lanka on fuel tankers have to be made at the current rates. Who is behind these transactions? The central bank governor has issued instructions to banks on offering money to the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation to purchase fuel. At the same time, the central bank has said that it had released dollars for this purpose. Power cuts are among the many issues affecting the people as well. Sri Lanka experienced an island-wide power outage on the 3rd of December during a work-to-rule campaign by engineers. Senior officials at the CEB raised accusations that the power outages was an act of sabotage. Eventually, the Norochole coal power plant that generates 300 megawatts of power experienced a failure due to the power outage. The CEB had to depend on hydropower to fill the shortage and also increase its dependency on diesel and thermal power plants. The Sapugaskanda refinery that produces fuel required to generate power is currently inactive. The sequence of decisions and moves that led to this situation lies clear. Now moves are underway to re-sign contracts with independent power producers to obtain power for 3 years. Sri Lanka also has the capability of generating power through liquefied natural gas or LNG. However, a 40% stake of the Kedavalapitiya LNG power plant and the contract to supply LNG to Sri Lanka it is the people who are bearing the brunt of these crises. However, it is evident that these issues do not seriously impact a certain group of people in the country. A situation of this magnitude never occurred in countries that have been badly affected by COVID-19. If that is the case, can COVID-19 be considered as a cause for this crisis anymore? We report, you decide. The agreement to give away a 40% stake of the Kedavalapitiya power plant to a US company named New Fortress Energy has been challenged at the Supreme Court. While several parties have moved court against this deal, Ministers Udaya Gammanpila, Vasudeva Nanayakkara and Vimal Weeravansha have intervened in favour of the petition. The Attorney General told court today that the three ministers had violated the principle of collective responsibility by filing a case in court instead of opposing the decision in the cabinet itself. He also informed court that Minister Udaya Gammanpila, who formulated the national energy policy, had tabled a cabinet proposal on the agreement on the 17th of October 2020. President's Counsel Sanjay Rajaratnam pointed out that there are several court rulings stating that the ministers must resign if they don't agree with the decisions of the cabinet. The Attorney General pointed out that the three ministers should also bear responsibility for the cabinet's decisions. The prosecution requested the Supreme Court to reject the petitions filed against the agreement to sell shares of the Kerawalupitiya power plant to a US-based New Fortress Energy without consideration. The petitions were taken up before a judge bench comprising Justices Jayantha Jayasuriya, L.T.B. Dehideniya, Buwaneka Aluvihare, Vijit Malagoda and Priyantha Jayawardena.
As people are facing multiple issues due to the energy crisis, views were expressed in Parliament on the tender process to construct the section of the Central Expressway from Galagedara to Ramukkana.
You tabled this cabinet paper on the 16th of January. This cabinet paper sought permission to cancel the tenders given to international contractors and to replace it with a process to award these tenders to local contractors. On the 27th of January, just after 10 days, you presented another cabinet paper reversing your previous proposal and requested permission again to follow the international tender process. The technical committee that decides on these tenders was also changed. There is a massive controversy surrounding this.
If we can't find enough funds, we are ready to change our stance. That's why there is a government. If you need the permission of the cabinet to change such decisions, we have to present it to the cabinet for its approval. They are alleging that we have looted 16 billion rupees. When your government was in power, it reduced the expressway having 6 lanes to just 2 lanes and still spent the 66 billion that was allocated for the expressway with 6 lanes. Many were involved in this. It was your government that awarded a tender for 43 billion rupees to construct the Kadawatha-Mirugama section, while there was already a pending tender for 25 billion rupees. All of you looted 18 billion rupees. Now these politicians are speaking of a tender that is not even been initiated. We still haven't even opened the envelopes of these tenders.
When we came to power in 2015, Mahinda Rajapaksa had plans to award the construction of the Kadawatha-Mirugama section to the MCC. It was them who wanted to award it to the MCC.
You are in power now. If you know the thieves involved and if you know how the theft was done, all of you should punish them without wasting the valuable time of this house.
They are saying that this tender has not been awarded and that it is still being negotiated in the cabinet subcommittee. An estimate of the losses has been prepared that would be about $825 million or 167 billion Sri Lankan rupees. In the case where you convert it according to the exchange rates used when importing goods, the loss will be around 206 billion Sri Lankan rupees. When you are awarding a contract to a local company, the cost should decrease. But if the cost is more when you award it to a local contractor, the country will have to bear the loss.
The question we have is, how did you get to know the value of these bids when we haven't opened the seals of these envelopes yet? Go and ask those people who fed you with this information as to why they couldn't complete this in 7 months. The MCC company has not made an offer on this. The MCC company has not even submitted a bid on this. The discussion here would create an indirect influence. I think we should discuss this after completing the procurement process.
All volumes of the final report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry that investigated the April 21st attacks were submitted in Parliament today.
The President's Media Unit said the 88-volume report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry was presented to Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abewardena by Parliamentary Director General Harigupta Rohanadira in Parliament this morning. The statement added that the final report was tabled in Parliament on the 8th of April and that records relating to evidence has not been released so far. The President's Media Unit said the relevant files had to be handed over to Parliament on the instructions of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, as the findings of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry need to be communicated to the people.
Sri Lanka had imported booster vaccines to ramp up its vaccination drive in the recent months. But these vaccines are at risk of going to waste as people are reluctant to get vaccinated.
Health Ministry says there are about 9.3 million booster vaccines at present. Official data indicate that 16.8 million people had obtained the first dose of the vaccine, but only 6.5 million people have obtained the booster vaccine so far. Officials say most vaccines are to expire in July, while the second batch is to expire in January next year. Health experts are urging people to obtain booster vaccines early as possible.
Immunity does not last forever, so therefore there is a need to boost this immunity, and definitely there is evidence to say that a third dose helps in preventing infection, but more importantly preventing hospitalization and death. So there is no question that people should take the booster without any scientific background, who say, for example, that the Pfizer vaccine induces sterility and that the Pfizer vaccine causes mutation. Now all these are rubbish.
Professional rock climber Jayanti Kurutumpala says Sri Lanka can promote sustainable tourism through rock climbing. She made these remarks at an online discussion organized by the Tourism Authority to promote the unknown treasures in the country.
Outdoor rock climbing is showing great potential for Sri Lanka to attract adventurous tourists to the country. Jayanti Kurutumpala, the first Sri Lankan to summit Mount Everest in 2016, expressed these views on the potential of rock climbing in Sri Lanka.
This is actually in Horana, inside the Kodigahakanda Sanctuary, at one of the only places in Sri Lanka where you can actually practice rock climbing and learn the sport in a safe environment. The beautiful thing is, if the sport is developed, you get climbers coming from all parts of the world and climbing, and it can become a sustainable sort of ecosystem where, sustainable tourism for the communities in the area. This is something that tourists actually overseas. You get climbers who go to a country and they will spend a week, sometimes a month, just climbing, eating, sleeping, climbing, eating, sleeping. That's all they'll do.
Sri Lanka's potential in terms of trekking, hiking and mountaineering were also discussed at the event.
In some news just in, Minister Mahinda Amaravira assures that there will be no fuel price increase. He made this statement following a special cabinet meeting that was held this evening. He said that fuel prices will be maintained at the current levels despite global prices hitting an all-time new high. Once again, in some news just in, Minister Mahinda Amaravira assures that there will be no fuel price increase. He made this statement following a special cabinet meeting that was held this evening. He said fuel prices will be maintained at the current level despite global prices hitting a new high. Now moving on in more local news, 16-year-old Indian chess sensation has stunned world number 1 Magnus Carlsen.
Magnus has done. Magnus goes knight c3.
What? It's a mistake.
16-year-old Ramesh Babu Pragnananda stunned Magnus Carlsen, beating the world number 1 during the Athens Masters. Pragnananda, nicknamed Prag, belied his age and his experience as he remained cool and collected, while Carlsen appeared to make mistakes to present opportunities to the Indian youngster. And although the 5-time world champion fought to get back into the game, Prag didn't give him an opening, eventually holding on for a famous victory in the rapid chess tournament. It was Prag's first victory over Carlsen, and he became the youngest player to beat Carlsen since the superstar became world champion in 2013.
That's a wrap of Primetime News on TV1. I'm Charlotte Benedict for the Newsfirst team. Take care. God bless.